Hey everyone, welcome to the very first Key in the Lake podcast. I am Jake Hookey. I'm joined with my good friend Wilson Torres, and we are going to talk about all things whiskey on this podcast, kind of relating back to who we are, how we got into the industry, friends of ours. We're going to have conversations with them as well, all throughout. Mostly talk about kind of what went on throughout the week in the whiskey world and how it relates back to us and the story that whiskey tells through the whole timeline of America, and the important notes that we want to kind of always talk about when it comes to everything whiskey. So that could include bourbon, Scotch, Irish, whatever kind of comes to mind on that podcast. But most of all, we're just kind of sticking around the basis of how does whiskey affect our lives and play into it, and hopefully it affects yours too in a very positive way. So the first podcast we're doing right now, Wilson and I are just going to talk about kind of how we met, how we got into the whiskey industry, and where we're going on for right now. So the floor is yours, Mr. Torres.
Afternoon, my friend. Cheers to you today.
Cheers. We will be drinking on each podcast, not a lot, just a little bit here and there.
Just a little sip, sipping and a little, sneaking.
Definitely. And so what we're sipping on today is Booker's, the Kentucky Chew. It's a 6-year-old blend of bourbons all throughout, and very tasty, kind of near and dear to both of our hearts in a simple way.
Very
maybe
simple
not
way.
So simple way.
Yeah.
Too. But why'd you choose this one to sip on for the first one, Wilson?
Well, I think it's, plain and simply, it's just to pay tribute to our friendship. When we worked together, first started working together about 3 years ago at Koval, I think we kind of generated an instant friendship in a sense where we kind of understood each other. And I immediately saw that you had this tremendous wealth of knowledge in regards to whiskey, and you were kind enough to share your well, that helps too. You talked about your granddad and Bernie and his time at the Jim Beam factories and distilleries, I should say. So I thought it would be the perfect bourbon to start off our podcast with. Not every week, of course, we'll try different things, but I thought just to pay homage and to pay respects to those before us, our current friendship and where it takes us into the future, and share these sips together.
Yeah, what Wilson's speaking on, my grandpa was an engineer at Jim Beam for a number of years. It kind of started right after I was born, pretty much, and so I was fortunate enough to kind of visit him there on occasion when I go down to Kentucky and see him and my grandma, of course, as well, but I was kind of always more intrigued with my grandpa's life. It just seemed a little bit more rugged, always had some interesting stories. I was just fascinated by kind of all the Jim Beam memorabilia kind of all throughout the house, too, and kind of always stayed a part of my life, and my grandpa is one of the biggest influences of why I entered this industry. A few years back, definitely kind of wanted to pay homage to him. And when it comes to sipping whiskey and sipping with good friends, I think one thing that we share most prominently with each other is that it's all about the experience.
Correct.
When it comes to whiskey, whiskey should bring folks together. Whiskey should create community, and a good bottle should be shared with the ones that you love, the ones that are closest to you.
Absolutely.
And my proudest moments probably of having a glass of whiskey was with the former distiller we used to work with, and my grandpa was kind of an old school Kentuckian that really believes that even though he's not a Kentuckian, but just lived there for 40 years, but he believes that most bourbon, if you will, should be made down in the bluegrass state. So when he had a little bit of bourbon from Koval Distillery, where Wilson and I both worked at, and he's like, "Oh, this is pretty good," even though it's made in Chicago. He enjoyed it, and we had a nice little 200 milliliter bottle over the holidays a couple of years back, so that was pretty cool to have and have that experience together. And he's the one. Him and I share one of our favorite bourbons of all time is Jim Beam Black, and so I always have a bottle of that at home. And if you ever go into a party and looking for a nice little gift to bring over and a very sippable, relaxed bourbon to drink on, make cocktails with, it's a nice bottle for that $21, $22 price range. So couldn't recommend that. But it's kind of where our story came together a few years ago. Was at Koval, working together. Doing a number of things, but what we always tried to create was that the experience was the most important part of the sip, and for all of our customers, for anybody coming on tours, coming to events, the events that we attended as well, was all about how what this whiskey can bring to the place that you're at with it and the people you're sharing that moment with.
Correct.
Last night we both moved on from that distillery, so it's kind of just to let you guys know what we're doing currently in our lives. But yeah, we were at an event last night for Chicago Magazine, Barrel Night, so kind of in that event focus. And Wilson was pouring for the current distiller he works at, and of course talking with people.
Yeah, talking with many people. Yeah, it's Chicago Magazine puts on this was their I want to say fourth annual Barrel Night, geared towards any and all brands that are represented here in the city of Chicago. So there were about, how many would you say, about maybe 15, 20 brands in the house?
Yeah.
And to piggyback off what Jake mentioned, I was representing Union Horse Distilling Company, which is who I currently represent throughout the Chicagoland area and the state of Illinois. Small little 9-year-old distillery down out of Lenexa, Kansas, just 15 minutes west of Kansas City. So we consider Kansas City our metro home. But aside from that, it was just, again, piggyback off of what Jake said, they're a great story. Whiskey in itself is a great story. Experiencing whiskey is the basis to many stories, I'm sure. Or you can tell stories about whiskey or how its effects, or how much you look forward to a whiskey. Yeah. And people always ask, well, why do you do this if you like it so much? Or, it's just like, because that's exactly what I love about it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's just whiskey. But from the beginning of my day, throughout my day, and at the end of my day, when I do sit down with my sip of corn, as Kentuckians would say, it's exactly that meat in between the people, the conversations, even the no's that I get here and there. Not often, so I'll toot my horn on that.
He's a pretty good salesman. You'll soon know that he can sell anything. So.
I appreciate that. But yeah, it's the in between meat. It's what makes this industry so enjoyable, and it's probably the only experience that attacks all 5 senses.
Very important. Go into that.
Yeah. Just all five senses.
What we're doing right
especially
now.
What we're doing right now.
Drinking right now.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, Booker was who's former lead at Jim Beam, and now his son and his grandson kind of run the company. Booker passed away actually the same year that my grandfather retired from Jim Beam, and so we actually have a bottle of Booker at home that's autographed to my grandpa Bernie. Mm-hmm. And it was just a few months before he had ended up passing away, and so that's kind of what's important to us. But also with Booker, going back to him, he was notorious about chewing through a palate, and that's why this one's called Kentucky Chew.
Correct.
Because he would literally chew through the whiskey to get all the aroma, get all the flavor, to really taste it all, to see what the drink, the complexity was all about.
Right,
and for like a lot of novice drinkers or people just maybe don't enjoy whiskey as much, they're afraid of all those flavors sometimes because it's overwhelming and they don't know how to enjoy it. But
Correct.
and some whiskey can be very hot meaning higher proof in alcohol. But this one's 126 proof, and we were just talking about how light it is and how flavorful and zesty.
Yes.
Very, very oaky as well. But go back to what you were talking about with using all 5 senses, because Booker was notorious for doing that. When he went on his little road show in the early 90s, his approach to sampling out whiskey was to pour it, let the person, tell them, demonstrate it about how to sniff it, have the mouth open, how to set it on your lips, set it on the top of your gums with your mouth too. But he never told them what they were tasting or what they're going to taste. He let them experience it for themselves.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I've come across, even last night, in using it as an example. Well, what am I going to taste? Well, whatever your tongue tells you. It's just...
And maybe a little rum, scotch,
and maybe water. It's like, I have had... it gets to a point where after, it's a 3.5, maybe a 3-hour event, and by, the first hour and a half to 2 hour, entering the second hour, people are pretty much, their palate is just shot. Industry standard is, if you're part of it, that after your third or fourth sip of whiskey, or taste, I should say, in that environment, you're pretty much done for the night. Unless you take a good 15 to 20 minutes to reset your palate with water, crackers, or something just to reset your palate so it doesn't get overwhelmed. So it's one of the things people's like, well, what am I supposed to taste? And I'm like, well, you tell me.
Exactly.
Take a sip. Take a smell it a little bit. But there's joy in that too. because normally an event of that nature is geared towards 3 different types of people. The first is the actual whiskey fan. The second is the novice whiskey drinker. And then the third is my date. You know,
some people can have some experience dates, though.
Exactly.
World,
some experience dates are great. Some birthday gifts. Hey, my girlfriend bought me this for my birthday, or this was my Christmas gift, or whatever may be the case. You know, but it's still a joy because every experience is different, and it just that's all I can go back to is just the experience that you share with them, teaching them how to enjoy the experience, or walking them through, I should say, because I don't know everything. I've always relied on you, Jake, to.
I don't know much.
No, you don't know much, but you know what's better.
Maybe.
But there's so much more, and that's, and I think, again, that's, in regards to this podcast, again, it's just like, that's what's going to be really cool about this journey together, is that, I'm on the front lines, but you have such a wealth of knowledge and what you've shared with me and taught me, and then what the industry as well has taught me and us, I feel, is that there's just so much more before that.
Definitely.
And each tiny little drop, goes into a bottle that, ultimately is going to be popped open at an event, at home, at a bar, in a restaurant, and it's going to be shared. You may not know who you're sharing that bottle with in any of those circumstances or situations or environments, but you all will have some sort of experience with that.
100%. And I think what we have, what we really want to try to relay to people and paint the picture of what the guests will have is that we had the privilege of literally working in a distillery. Our seats to our office were literally 20 feet away from where everything for our old company was being produced.
Yeah.
And what came of that was awesome friendships with the distillers.
Oh, absolutely.
That we still maintain this day, and they'll be on the show telling their stories. So when you literally see the people that are supporting their families off about what they're making out back in the distillery, and then you taste it, it's almost like you do, in a way, taste the sweat that they were working with and the grind that they went through, and they got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the lead distiller is never off of work, really. Everything is automated these days, so you can check through app devices kind of what's going on with your stills. So if there's anything going on, like our former lead distiller at Cabal, Mike, he would be there, on a Saturday morning when he had the day off just to check on things and make sure things were going good, because he treated that distillery and every single product and every single barrel that came out of it, down to like almost every single drop that went into the barrel, as almost like a child, because they care about it enough. And that's where you see that, like, if you will, the blood, sweat, and tears of the industry.
Correct.
And you really become, it's almost like a poetic sense of appreciating it, where like where that's coming from every single time. And
That's correct.
you want to honor the people that made it by drinking it well, drinking it with friends, drinking it with family, sharing a bottle with people. I think with you and I, like, one of our favorite things to do is we go to a party, go to a friend's house. We never come empty-handed. We always want to bring a bottle to share, and it might most times it's not even the bottle that we're working for.
No,
it's maybe just something that we enjoy, or we know, like, hey, we're gonna make these certain cocktails tonight, and this whiskey, this bourbon.
Yeah.
To be honest, Wilson and I lend our hands to bourbon a lot more than anything else when we drink.
This is true.
But do have a lot of other variations that we enjoy when it comes into the whiskey world, and I don't think we say no to a drink too often either. But it's just always about how can you inform people a little bit more on taste, on so many labels that are out there as well.
There is. There's so many labels out, and I guess everyone would experience that. I mean, if you go to your corner store, corner liquor store, wherever hood you live here in Chicago, I mean, you're going to have one within a mile radius to you. And you'll go in there. They may not have the widest selection, so you go to the next one, and then the next one. And of course, we all go to Benny's because that's, if it ain't at Benny's, then it ain't worth drinking, as I say. I wonder if we can get a sponsorship on that.
Benny's is a very large liquor store chain here in Chicago that really does have the best selection, various selection,
correct.
When it comes to finding, if you want to find something, their motto is true. We'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. Yeah, but there's just just to go back to the point is there's just so much. How do you know? Mm-hmm. So what I've advised people to do, and what I've learned to do through you as well, is to have it in a cocktail. Go to your, local, you probably won't go to your local watering hole where you get a PB&J for $5 on Tuesday nights, because they probably don't, yeah, I mean, on a Tuesday, why not, so, but, I always tell people, try it in a cocktail. And then, because, there are some places that list what specific whiskey and or bourbon.
And don't be afraid to ask if it's not on there.
Yeah, if it's not on, they're like, hey, what bourbon do you use? What whiskey do you use?
Yeah.
Because chances are, if you like it in the cocktail, you're going to like it neat on the rock, sure, with a couple drops of water, yeah, or again in that cocktail or in another cocktail. Yeah. That's how I've learned my palate, and that's how I recommend people to do. Now, what also people feel that I've also told is like, oh, that could be expensive. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Especially if you go to any liquor store, you're going to pay anywhere between $30 to $80 for a bottle of bourbon and or whiskey. So I always tell them is like, go on YouTube. There are some great reviewers on YouTube that really share in front of you via YouTube what they're tasting, what they're smelling, what nosing, the appropriate, term to use in that case. But, I personally don't have a bottle on my own personal bar that is over $30. Mm. And
that you didn't get for free.
That I didn't get for free. There's perks in the industry as well. Yes, there's trades and there's awesome perks in it. Yeah. But me myself, that's like, why? Because I know what I like, and I have found it in that price range, and it's normally sitting right next to what I represent at Benny's on that bottom shelf. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of what do you want to experience, because not every single bourbon is different. Every single bourbon is different, and every single whiskey is different. That's why there's so many of us. That's why there's so many great, unique takes on developing, producing, and sharing these whiskeys and bourbons, because there's different takes on it. Of course, there's standards that are set that you follow, to be considered a particular spirit or category, but I have found that the more simplistic bourbon mash bills or just bourbons and whiskeys in general are by far the best. Yep. Personally, for my palate, And what do I have them in? Neat or in a classic cocktail. I don't do the 17 ingredient, 30-minute cocktail preparation, thing. But I have had those cocktails. Yeah. And are they wonderful? Absolutely. But again, you're paying more for an experience.
Yes.
Because you actually see these craftsmen and women making these wonderful live, just soul-touching libations, and you just be quiet, and you just look,
just watch,
and you just watch, and next thing you know,
replicate it at home, you probably don't.
You'll spend $3.50 at Benny's or somewhere else, and you'll be pissed off because you're like, I just fucked up.
But there are so many great, amazing cocktails you can make for yourself at home for like very affordable price, and just always to have some bitters on your shelf, always to have a bourbon to go to, always have some seltzer water or something like that.
Correct.
There's various other tonics that we
basic things
that we like and we enjoy companies over others, but don't be afraid to go spend that $6, $7 on a 4-pack of good ginger beer, because it's going to bring a much more better experience to your cocktail at home.
There is,
and that's don't just have the control of not drinking the rest of the bottle and just save it for cocktails. Because there's a lot of sugar in it, and that could be bad for you.
And that's real bad for you.
But no, it just goes like everything that we kind of have been hitting on the last 2 minutes is about the experience in general. And like Wilson said, you can have such great bourbons and such great whiskeys for below $30. And just bringing out other elements to your bar and having that, it's great to have. And when you go out to a bar, there's a reason why that cocktail probably costs $15, $16. Some of our favorite cocktail bars in the city, we are in Chicago, by the way. I probably didn't really say that, but we are based out of Chicago, the both of us. And we go to some of our favorite bars, and sometimes you get like a nice cocktail for $12, $13. And probably the one main reason we go back there is because they have heavy pours, so you're getting your money's worth there when it comes to it. But you're really going to taste the difference when it comes to the complexity and the elevations of the drink.
True.
All the aromas that are hitting all your senses. Really, when it comes to your nose and you're sipping it, and maybe it's a garnish or something like that of mint or whatever it may be. Yeah. It really hits you, and then it parallels great with the flavors going inside of your mouth too.
This is true.
And that's what makes it a great cocktail. And we like to play around with cocktails at home for both for our jobs as well. And Wilson's come up with some really great cocktails in the past for companies he's represented doing collaborations with. So, but it's kind of we have the availability to play around with it because we have the whiskey
Correct.
at hand.
Yeah, we have it on
when
hand.
you go to a cocktail bar, let them, watch them, talk to them, ask people, ask questions, because you know what the bartenders love? They love talking about what they're doing.
It's true.
For us as individuals, I think we'll safely say is that when we're out representing a company or talking to somebody about whiskey, we love talking to somebody that's like, help me.
Yes.
Where do I start? What is what's the best bourbon to go to for this price range?
Yeah.
Where should I begin with when it comes to ryes? What should I get other than Jameson for an Irish whiskey? It's like, which is fine. Jameson is like what I start my foundation of drinking. Essentially, I will be very honest with that. And Jameson Black Barrel right up there for me when it comes to Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
And even proposed to my fiance with a bottle of Irish whiskey from Jameson. So, yeah, exactly. But well, that's a long other story that we'll save for another podcast. Maybe she can come on and talk about it sometime.
Well, she's in an industry as well.
She's in the industry.
Yeah.
It kind of relates back to this. Put it out there, all out there. 12 our cards on the table. She also does work for Jim Beam too. So the Beam Distillery runs strong in the Hookie family. Maybe someday I'll just have to go over there and say hello. Those products, like I kind of getting back to, is that we want to talk to people about everything that we know. We want to learn more too. That's the biggest thing.
I agree.
I can say we both love being not wrong, but just not knowing.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if you've had any experiences recently with that, without on visits or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Not knowing what you're getting yourself into. And as far as sales on my side, I do ride with my distributor representatives. I do cold calls on my own. And the cold call is a prime example of what you don't know what you're getting yourself into or what you're walking into. You just know that you need to get out there. You need to get that brand out in front of people. Even if it's the smallest, corner liquor store. It's you never know. You never know how many people visit that corner liquor store in hopes of finding something really good instead of having to venture out to something larger as far as store space. I walk in one place actually last week, and I'm thinking this place has to be a winner for me. And I walk in there, and I waited my hour and a half because there's obviously there's breweries, there's other,
how you do, how a sale starts,
A sale basically starts on doing research, There are over 5,000 bars and restaurants in Chicago. I don't know how many liquor stores are. That's something that I should look into. But let's just say that there's 5,000 liquor stores.
Plus 225 breweries.
Plus 225 breweries.
20 or so distilleries within the Chicagoland.
Within the Chicagoland area, or even throughout the Midwest.
Yeah. So
So we are all competing for that last space on these shelves, or menus, or glasses, for that matter.
Menu placement.
Yes, correct. So it's one of those things. It's like you got to do your research. You got to know who you align with and all that. So sometimes you just don't have time. You just got to go in and wing it. You happen to walk by somewhere. It's like, let's check this place out. I did that. The first time that I've done this, and was I met with a no? No. I was met with just silence. There was just no one there for me to talk to. But they asked me to sit at the bar. It's like, you can sit at the bar. We'll get the manager for you. I'm like, great.
Nice.
I literally sat there for an hour and a half, and that was my no for today. I didn't know how to react to that because I didn't get the no. I didn't get a yes. I didn't get a come back. I didn't get a business card. It was just me in silence at a bar in a dark restaurant bar, for an hour and a half. And I try not to disrespect space and time, so I try not to be like whip out the laptop and everything, do work while I wait.
Yeah.
So I literally just sat there in the dark and twiddled my thumbs.
It's like back in the day before
it's just you just sat there. I just sat there, But those are the risks. Not a risk. Those are the things you experience.
It's the grunt work you have.
It is. It's the pounding of the pavement. We literally are the old school salesperson.
Yeah. So Wilson is a brand rep for his company, and so what that means, he does a lot of sales and events when it comes to representing his distillery, because
Correct.
he is the single representation for his distillery out of Kansas in Chicago.
Yeah.
Because that's what their company does. They're a small company.
We're
They're a small distillery. we'll probably get into much more of their story because they have a great heritage story when it comes to both of us. We love to tell a story, obviously.
Yeah, stories are great.
So we'll get into that probably in the future podcast. But it's tough.
It is tough.
When you're a single person, you only rely on yourself, essentially, here in the market, where other larger corporations, if you want to call them that, distilleries, they will have full teams here based within the city.
Correct.
To compete. And even when you're competing with local distilleries, they might only have 1 or 2 reps, but they also have a lot more baggage, probably with their distributor.
Correct.
They also have a lot more kind of encouragement or support from their home base as well at their offices.
There's just I'm competing against, and many like me are competing against that.
Yes.
So it's a small militia against a large army of sort,
Essentially, you were the Bourbon Revolution in Philadelphia, taking on 15,000 troops from the U.S. Army.
There you
small
go.
militia built out of Pennsylvania.
That's the history portion of today's podcast. But yeah, it's tough because, like I said, you go into either a liquor store, a bar, restaurant, anyone who carries liquor, period, and serves liquor, and you could be first of 5 people waiting to speak to the same individual that's going to give you the yes, the no, or come back.
Yep.
So you wait, and of the 12 hours that I normally work a day, almost 4 of those hours are spent waiting. So literally, I'm just waiting for a moment, and you literally have a moment. So then now you have to put in all these other skill sets that you naturally either have or you are taught to pick up. So it's body language. How fast did the guy ahead of you go? Did he get a yes or a no? Knowing who's ahead of you.
Yeah.
If I know I have 4 breweries ahead of me, I'm good. I'm golden. I may have a shot with my brown liquor. Or if I have 3 other distillers in front of me, it's depending on who they are, what they make, and knowing that ahead of time. Or like I said, if you want to cut down on the weight, then I do my research. I look at the menu. I post up every once in a while just to get a feel for the place. Posting up, in other words, I'll go and hang out, have a cocktail, have a beer, have an appetizer of some sort, just to get a feel of what they do, how they do it, and the experience that they provide. Again, going back to the whole experience, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to be part of an experience. So as mentioned, there's 5,000 bars and restaurants in the city of Chicago. So if I can be in 1,000 of them, that'd be great. Is it possible? Yeah. But it just takes a lot of work, So it's just a matter of just really, literally going door to door and to the right places, speaking to the right people, and then, what? Honestly, sometimes they may like your product, but if they don't like you, you're done. You're out.
That's why I'm on a sales rep.
It's sad. I always tell Jake that he should join me in the sales side of things because I honestly feel that you would do well. But I get it.
No, I had to do an impromptu sales call one time back in the day at the distillery, and a lady made me cry, so I never went back. I was just coming to see how things were going. I wasn't even trying to sell anything.
Yeah, I was just like, hey, thanks for doing that.
I just left weeping in my scarf.
No's are just no's, and honestly, if you go in with a D, and I share this with as many people that are close to me, always, I'm just have a conversation.
Yeah, that's so much of it. It's
not. I just want to have a talk with you.
Exactly, because it's not about. If you're trying to pitch somebody, they can see it right away. But the natural flow of a conversation, which is hard to do because being a conversationalist is difficult. But
it is.
Telling the story of a distillery, telling what makes this rye different from other ryes on your shelf, what it can do, and when people really see the passion that you have for this industry or for other sales reps that we're friends with as well, and they are successful, there's a reason why, because they have a good story to tell. And it's not a contrived story at all. It's just about their passion dedicated to this industry, dedicated to whiskey.
Correct.
And just really wanting to tell people that they're parts of the story.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes it comes down to story. You're absolutely right. Last night, again, to use that as an example at Barrel Night, a guy literally came up to me. He's just like, what makes you different than everyone else in this room?
That's a good question.
And I took
Was he talking about you or your distillery?
Our distillery.
Okay.
Me, of course, we're all different, but that's not the question. So I took a good 10 seconds, and I'm like, we took the biggest risk. So he kind of looked at me. He's like, all right.
Starting point.
Yeah, you got me. Tell me your risk. I'm like, So the current distillery that I represent now is Union Horse Distilling Company out of, as mentioned, Lenexa, Kansas. Great story. We'll get into that another day. But just to give you an idea, this is a 9-year-old distillery this year. It'll turn 9 years old this year. They took the risk and sat on their own juice that they produced for 5 years.
So people, I'll speak about that because not so Wilson doesn't sound biased, but
yes.
What a lot of distilleries will do early on in their careers, they will source their whiskey. There are source plants all across the country.
Yeah.
There's a few main ones. There's a big cellars. Basically, all the juice, when we say juice, we mean whiskey, comes out the still, is produced almost entirely by about 15 distilleries, a majority of it, whereas there's hundreds, thousands now of distilleries across the country. When they're in their basically beginning stages, what the distilleries will do is they'll have some of their products sourced so they can put something out there in the market. Now, this was probably seen as a negative thing about 5 years ago or so. But now, as long as you're honest about it, people are okay with it. They appreciate it.
And what just be transparent about it.
Exactly. And what these distilleries do now is they might source it. They're not even making those first batches for the first couple of years, but they'll actually go down and taste and really find a barrel that they want to represent their company. So they'll do that, and then they can get their product out there in the market faster, and that they can make money essentially, because starting a distillery is a huge financial risk and endeavor. So what his company decided to do is we are going to make everything 100% ourselves.
Correct.
So that means for is it 2 years or 3 years?
5 years.
5 years. For 5 years. For 5 years, they distilled product. They threw it into the barrel where all the magic happens to the flavor. That's where you get the complexities of your whiskey, and that's one thing where the profiles will be really different from bottle to bottle. And they sat on that for 5 years, not to make any money. So essentially, their product's only been out in the market for 4 years.
For 4 years.
And they can say they're a 9-year-old distillery, but they've only been really selling their whiskey for 4 years. And they have them coming into Chicago, which is one of the best markets in the country when it comes to drinking, because we just really enjoy drinking in this city and eating too.
And eating. Gotta eat.
Yeah, you can tell with me. Wilson makes fun of me because I think he's some anorexic or something like that. I swear I eat a lot.
I'm the one who's the double-chinned,
Me too,
and he's, that's your beard, dude.
Oh. Anyway, go back to Union Horse. That takes a lot of risk, and we have another friend's distillery up in Wisconsin that did the same thing.
Yeah.
But you taste the purity of the whiskey. I believe when it comes to that, because
I agree.
Not because it's because they made it themselves and this guy made it in a single batch, blah blah blah. It's because it's consistent.
Correct.
And they knew what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. They took that approach, and they're capitalizing on it now.
It's all an intent.
Yes.
It's everything that they intended to do, not to do, but to provide people as far as the experience comes through.
Yeah.
Not just in a story. I think the story is the bonus, but the actual liquid to lip moment is intentional. And that's the beauty of what we do. That's the beauty of this small batch market that we're a part of.
Yep.
But it also, but to go back to that gentleman, when I told him that, he's just like, so you're telling me, he says, that your stuff is 5 years old because you sat on it for 5 years. And I'm like, yeah, I took a risk. And I explained to him what Jake just did for us. And he's just like, okay. And I told him, I was bold. I had a sip or two already. So I told him, I was like, you know what? I put money on this. I was like, you will be back twice more before this event's over, and you will bring up to 5 other people. And he looked at me. He's just, he kind of gave me that look, that Chicago stare you give someone who's you think is just full of shit right now. You're just talking shit, and because you're on the other side of the table and whatnot. But I looked him dead in the eye, and I told him, you will be back twice more for more yourself, either to try the same thing you just enjoyed, or to experience 2 or 3 other of the expressions I was representing, or I was pouring, I should say. And sure enough, that gentleman came back within the hour and said, you're right. That particular sip was the best for me this evening, and I have my friend here to try that specific sip as well. No problem. That friend then told 5 other friends. Those friends literally hovered, And by the end of the night, forget about it. They took my card. I mean, it's just, and it's not. I'm not saying it in a sense where I'm trying to be.
You're not trying to brag about it.
Yeah, but it's just that's how much I believe in it.
Yes, and this is how whiskey grows. Whiskey grows by word of mouth.
Correct.
Obviously, there's a lot of other marketing factors and advertising factors that come into it.
Yeah.
But the story grows by the taste. And
Correct.
that's what distilleries have done for 400 years in this country.
Yeah, it's just
distilleries have relied on people coming back to them.
Correct.
And whiskey has been used for so many different things in this world, in this country, and particularly when it comes to bartering for what was your money out in the Old West. Because like Kentucky, if you don't know, was the frontier, was the West.
Was the West.
And so these people that were out there and making whiskey that sometimes whiskey was seen as a way of form of money. And,
it's true.
And we have seen whiskey, wars nearly start because of whiskey. The land has expanded because of whiskey. So much has gone on through this country.
Medicine has extended.
Bills have been written about it. Even the profiteering and the crime that took place during Prohibition was all not just because of whiskey, but because of alcohol.
Because of the alcohol, yeah.
And see those reflected through decades later.
Yeah.
All of that took on during Prohibition. I'm sure we'll probably have a deep dive in Prohibition because it's one of my personal favorite subjects because I think it's fascinating how it tore our personal liberties out of this country for a brief moment in time, if you can call 13 years a brief moment, and if you can say it really actually disappeared because
13 years.
Some say that maybe numbers actually showed that people were drinking more during Prohibition than pre-Prohibition. I'm not sure how that happened. Who knows?
Well, I know a lot of it was taking place here in Chicago, so
yeah, definitely.
During so
maybe some of my Italian brethren started some stills on the west side, but it's something that I think it's very important to know that people that it's how a product grows. It grows because it perseveres because of what it does, and basically what you're looking for is consistency.
Sure.
And having great flavors is something that every distillery goes for. And how you get those great flavors out of your whiskey starts with the mash bills. Mash bill is the ingredients you put into your whiskey. It starts with the care it goes into when it's being mashed and then fermented and distilled. And then what really takes place, and like I said earlier, the magic happens when it goes inside of that barrel. And it lives there for 2, 3, 4, 23 years. And we wait to see what comes out on the other side of it. And when you get to taste that product at the very end, it's a very, very special moment.
It is very special. I mean, one of the things I've grown to appreciate, aside from that gold that comes out of those barrels after 4 or 5 years or however long each distillery goes, but it's the actual truest beginnings of whiskey. Mm-hmm. And that's historically speaking. I'm thinking more nature, the soil that corn was grown out of, I should say. The roots of that oak tree. Mm-hmm. That oak tree has stories. That oak tree has seen seasons upon seasons.
And what means by oak tree is that the barrels come from oak trees. And honestly, a barrel that with all of its staves, it's 29, 31, 32 staves.
32 staves.
Depending inside that barrel, it could have
4
different trees.
Yeah, it could.
And every single tree, every single stave that's part of that barrel has a different story.
Correct.
And the story ends it just begins, actually.
It just begins
there. The story
there.
just begins when it comes out of that barrel.
Exactly.
And after it's been living there for a number of years. And that's kind of what we're really trying to tell, with this project, is that whiskey has a great story, and it doesn't end when you have your sip. I don't think it really ever ends. I think it just begins because you can have that conversation with people and share it with everybody. Yeah. So what we want to do with you guys here at Key to Lake is really share the stories, the insights, of talking to people that are representatives for companies, distillers, bartenders, reps that are maybe a little bit related to the industry when it comes to tonics, when it comes to mixers.
Correct.
How did they fit into this whole whiskey world? Because it's a very fascinating world, and we're experiencing a wonderful boom right now. It started about 10 years ago or so, and it's only been elevated since then. What we really want to do is just share all those insights with the public and do our best way of conversing with people, having through conversations, if you will, an interview, but most of it will be through conversation.
More conversation.
More free-flowing on each and every podcast. But
no pun intended.
No pun intended. No pun intended at all. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. I think that's our time up for this first inaugural podcast. But
sorry, guys.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry at all, because it worked out all right, I think. Hopefully our better halves will not make fun of us too much for recording the conversation that we have every Friday. We also want to thank Beguile Brewing. We are recording on the upstairs venue of their brewery. They are releasing the new Imperial Pajamas this Friday afternoon. So we'll have a few sips of that probably.
3 different variants. Honey butter fried chicken is coming out for dinner, so they'll have the truck outside.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we'll be recording up here on Friday afternoons. And like I said, we're going to have some more guests with us all throughout.
Yeah.
But I want to say big ups to Beguile for letting us record here and on the upstairs in front of these barrels that are aging some beer, some old whiskey barrels that are aging some beer. So it creates a nice ambiance, and the train hasn't passed by once.
Not even once.
Yeah,
it's really well. We are butted up against a metro station.
It's true.
So
maybe we won't have any trains, but other than that, thanks for everybody for listening.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you next week, and we'll have some more stories to share.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.